Small Changes by this 27, Chapter 31, Familiar Familiar Ignitions. Naruto waited patiently at the gate of the village, back leaned up against one of the massive wooden structures as he idly watched the clouds drift across the sky. He remembered watching Ensui Sensei do this a lot when he was just in Genin. It would often take him Itachi, and Susui almost half an hour to get him to stop. They had tried various methods from attacking him, which rarely worked, when they were lowly getting, to just sitting there and annoying him. That was Shisui's preferred method anyways. Itachi had once even tried to place the man under a genjutsu. He spent the next 10 minutes hanging upside down from a tree by his shadow. He might have stayed there longer, but Ensui had quickly grown bored by maintaining the technique. He wasn't sure why he was in such a pensive mood today. Even Anko had commented that he seemed distracted. Perhaps it was just because he felt as though he was about to lose his precious little students. He was almost sure they were shoe-ins for tuning. The decision on the front would likely be made by the end of the week. He sighed in irritation before straightening up and facing back towards the village. The sound of footsteps rousing him from his introspection. It wasn't as though he would never see them again. He had just grown rather attached to the kids. Morning, Sensei. Ami chippered voice through the mid-morning quiet, eliciting a smile from the redhead. Speaking of the students, his favorite was walking up the gate at the very moment. He couldn't help but notice that she seemed a little more thoughtful today. Morning, Ami-chan. That's a rather large sword, Naruto replied easily, referring to the almost comical large ninja toe that resented between the violet shoulder blades, forming an X with her other more sized appropriate sword. The girl blinked in surprise before subtly palming the hint of the blade, as if just remembering it was there. Oh, yeah, she looked down, an almost quizzical expression on her features. Nissan was actually real strange yesterday, and right before I left this morning, she gave me her sword. It was really weird because she knows I can't use it yet. She said she had a new sword, one that needed her attention more. The girl shrugged, her lips looking uncertain on which way to turn in her confusion. It looked kind of old and beaten up, though. A sigh escaped her lips. I don't get her sometimes. That at least elicited a small chuckle from Naruto. That's true, and those words. He shuffled the girl's hair for a moment, much to her obvious irritation, but at least it stopped her from thinking too much. Sometimes you just have to stop trying to understand the people you care about and accept their decisions, no matter how strange they seem. One day you'll understand them. Trust me. His smile was infectious, and soon Ami bore a small one herself. He quickly turned his attention to a large blade on her back, though. We're going to have to seal that one up, he continued. It's only going to weigh you down and mess with your balance if you carry it like that. Spotting her worried expression, he simply grinned again. Don't worry, you can keep the scroll with you. It's just best to not try and get used to a new weight right before a new mission. Looking at your sister, I'm sure you'll grow into it one day, just like you'll eventually grow out of the sword you'll have now. He winked slightly. By then you might have someone of your own to pass it on to. After a few moments of thought, the violet nodded, and Naruto quickly showed her how to seal away her largest equipment. Now then, he chuckled as they finished up, and she strapped the scroll into one of her pouches. Don't make a habit of going around collecting swords now. Kenjutsu users are rather particular about them, and more than a few have a recognizable history as well as a reputation. Amich glowered in his direction quickly before being forced to relent as Sasuke and Sakura arrived, causing Naruto's smile to grow. Right then, I officially commence what may well be the very last mission of Team Naruto. He pointed dramatically off into the distance for a good few seconds before realizing that all of his genin were simply giving him a deadpan look. You don't have to put it like that, Sensei, Sakura intoned blandly, rolling her eyes at her sensei's antics. The redhead pounded before playfully crossing his arms with a childish scowl. You'll all miss me when we're separated, you'll see, he stated matter-of-factly. However, Sasuke and Sakura just stared at him with the same piercing look before walking right at the gates. There might as well have been a small rain cloud over Naruto's head as he hung in defeat, at least until Ame pulled lightly on his shirt. I'll miss you, Sensei, she quietly admitted, a faint blush darkening her pale cheeks. In an instant, Naruto's sour expression brightened into a grin that could have made the sun jealous, and that's why you'll always be my favorite Ami-chan, he announced just loud enough to be heard by his other two genin as they retreated as far from him as they could. With a quick ruffle to the violet's hair, he quickly strode off to join them, leaving her red face and her eye twitching. I won't miss that, though, she muttered darkly before storming off to catch up with her wayward team. It was actually a rather dull assignment for their so-called last mission, and Sasuke complained about it constantly. He constantly cited that if they were sure to be tuning, then why would they have to take such a simple mission? Naruto just argued right back that it was still a C rank, and even as tuning, they would be taking in missions like these. It didn't really seem to state the this. It didn't seem to state the dark-haired Uchiha, but at least he quieted down for a while. In reality, though, the mission was a C rank in name only. It was just a simple delivery mission to a town right on border with Tai no Kuni. The rank was only because it was so close to Ototegakure territory, and the two villages weren't exactly on friendly terms. However, Naruto had chosen the bland mission on purpose. No excitement, no action, no fighting or danger. He didn't want his team to remember their time like that. He wanted them to remember them as a team, and that was how they acted. They joked, they laughed, poked fun at one another, talked about the aimlessness and sometimes nonchalantness things, and generally behaved like Naruto believed a team should. On the outside, with their bickering and snide remarks, they might have appeared frosty or even distastefully towards one another, but nothing was said with venom, and everything was mostly good-natured. The mission might have even been completed in this manner too, but naturally problems were attracted to Naruto like iron to a magnet. And you should have seen how shocked the Hokage was. His pipe nearly fell out of his mouth. Naruto chuckled as he finished regaling one of the many stories from his youth, more specifically one of the pranks that Shisui had talked him and somehow Itachi into pulling. His genin laughed along with him. Ami actually wiped a tear from her eye as Sasuke determinedly fought down a smile. Naruto was rather proud of the young Uchiha. He remembered when his stories that involved Itachi used to make the boy scowl and generally darkened his mood. However, months later, and Sasuke had seemed to have slightly let up on the mood, on the warped view in his mind that Itachi had always been some scheming evil murderer. It seemed to lighten the boy's step to know that Itachi had at one point just been a normal kid like him. However, Naruto couldn't help but notice the confusion this also brought to the boy. Like him, Sasuke was now questioning what he knew about the older Uchiha. The Reddit could only hope that, like him, the numbers just wouldn't add up. In his momentary distraction, lost in his thoughts, Naruto almost didn't notice the trap laid before them on the simple country path that was taking them deeper into Hinokuni. However, at the last moment, the sixth sense shinobi spent lifetimes breathing snapped him out of his daze. Hakuna was suddenly palmed and flying through the air before his genin could even blink, sparing a stray wire to a tree that had been tripped between Sakura ignorantly walking through it. Naruto didn't blame her. The trap was extremely expertly hidden in the undergrowth, and even his eyes had only caught the flash of it as it was tripped. Immediately, the jovial Junin sensei was gone, replaced by the trained Ambu and potential Hokage candidate as a mask of steel descended over his features. Likewise, snapped out of their dazes, his genin moved into position as they had been trained, expertly coordinating to cover one another blind spots. Briefly, a proud grin slipped past Naruto's stalwart facade before that too was wiped clean, and his eyes began to instantly search the surrounding forest. Before his team could even ask what was happening, Naruto threw a single kunai high into the air before vanishing into a flash of red. All around them, he heard the veritable storm of steel. For a moment, the genin simply watched in awe as red flashes filled the air around them, blinking in and out quickly than they could follow at times. Then the dust settled. There were four shinobi bound nearly on the path in front of them, and all of it had happened in mere seconds. Behind them, Naruto stood with a scowl. These people had decided to crash what was supposed to be his team's last mission together. That was unacceptable in the redhead's eyes, and precisely what he didn't want to happen when he took this mission. In hindsight, he should have probably known better. You didn't have to do everything, Sensei. We could have handled it, Sasuke muttered as he relaxed his stance, the scar on his face for entirely different reasons. No need to take risks, though. I wouldn't want anything ruining our last mission together, right, Sasuke-kun? Naruto flippantly shot back, his cold mask melting away even as they watched. It still gave Ami shivers to see what that happened. It made all the Genin wonder if they would ever be able to seemingly flow between honed colors and a normally personality like that. Anyway, Naruto continued, what's the point of having these abilities if I don't use it to protect the people precious to me, like you guys? At that, both Sakura and Ami's cheeks flushed a little. The beaming grin the redhead gave didn't help. However, at that moment, Sasuke's danger senses flared, causing him to duck forward. At the same moment, a thin steel ninjato separated a few strands of hair from his scalp. Immediately, he whirled, Sharingan blazing fiercely as he laced out with a ferocious kick to sweep out a fifth to sweep out a fifth attacker's leg. They jumped back, but Sakura was already there, landing a devastating precious blow to the middle of their spine. The attacker, a grim-looking chunin with gray hair, immediately crumpled forward but managed to keep to their feet. That quickly changed as Sasuke once again pressed the attack, flowing into a crippling volley of fast-paced blows before sweeping off the man's feet. As he tried to get back up, he only found a cold steel pressed to his throat. Ami standing over him with a frosty look in her dark eyes. He only saw it for a moment, though, before the sword was suddenly reversed and he was knocked out soundly with the hilt of the blade. Immediately, Ami whirled on Naruto. The cold look vanished into one of annoyance as she unconsciously did the very same thing she had just been worried about moments before. What gives, Sensei? You missed one, she shouted, her voice catching a little in her irritation. However, she didn't expect the sly grin she got from the redhead. Sometimes the best way to protect someone is to make sure they can protect themselves. It may be our last mission, but I'm not going soft on you guys, Naruto responded easily, causing Nami's next sentence to die on her tongue and her mouth to open and close like a dry fish. Finally, she just clenched her eyes. She clenched her fist in her hair before exhaling loudly in expectation. Everything is training, remember? It was one of the first things I taught you, the redhead carried on. So what was the lesson today? Sasuke grunted, his own irritation masked behind his unusual apathetic look. That Takaraki Chunin always operated in groups of 5. Naruto shot back, his attention turned back to stay tied-up shinobi that were now glancing fearfully at the team that had effectively taken them down. Takagakure? Sakura questioned slowly, her eyebrows knitting together for a moment. But why would they attack us? Konoha and Taki are allies, aren't they? And at that, a very vicious grin took over Naruto's face, one his team had only seen when he was about to enter when they called interrogation mode. That's a good question, Sakura. His gaze flickered to the bound group, making them flinch briefly as they swore. His eyes flashed crimson for a second. Maybe our guests would be so kind to answer us. The Chunin quickly got over their momentary fright, though, individually looks of indignation and spite appearing on their faces. We're not telling you anything, you major villages trash. The Chunin that spoke did so with such pride in his voice. It was as though he was spitting the words at them in disgust. However, he seemed a bit nervous when Naruto simply continued to grin, stepping closer so that the Chunin could even make out the way his canines were just a little longer and sharper than the average person's. Oh, I'm sure you won't tell us much, he chuckled, but it was hollow and lacked any kind of mirth. Ibiki, on the other hand, well, he's all too persuasive, I'm afraid. Despite the best attempts to hide their fear of one of the tuning gulped quietly at that. Ibiki Moroni had a certain reputation across the elemental nations, and their supposed allies in Taki knew this all too well. However, the one who spoke out first did so again, doing his best to draw a sneer across his face, as though he were actually in some position of leverage. As if we'd get that far, he called out, at the same moment moving his jaw around in an obvious attempt to get at something in his teeth. A moment later, when he could only look up with knitted eyebrows and a worried frown, he spotted Naruto carefully examining the small pill between his fingers. Ah, so that would make you the squad leader then. Good to know, he commented idly. If the man had been about to commit suicide through this pill, then it meant that he was the one with the potential dangerous information. Well, that was for Ibiki and the others in the TNI department to find out. Right now, Naruto just needed quick answers. How did you? However, anything the Chunin was about to say was violently cut off as he was forced to gag on his own tongue. The redhead had roughly grabbed him by the back of his flak jacket and begun dragging him towards the trees. If anybody wants a crack course on infield interrogation, follow me. The joining flippantly called out in an wild wave before vanishing into the bush. The three, startled Genin, simply looked between one another before Sasuke quickly jogged off after him, an intrigued gleam in his eye. A few seconds later, Anami made hesitantly moves to follow him, looking back at Sakura sheepishly, a hand on the back of her head. Well, I did say I wanted to learn everything Naruto-sensei had to teach, and with that, she sped up after her other teammate, leaving Sakura to nervously paw at the front of her shirt. A few moments later, when a scream ripped through the trees and the faces of the Chunin around her paled, she nodded to herself. Yeah, I'll stay and guard the prisoners. Somebody had to, or at least she kept telling herself that. The Konoha that Team Naruto stepped into was very different to the one they had left not even a day ago. Shinobi were buzzing about in a flurry of activity, flitting across rooftops and coming and going through the gates like drones in a hive. Civilians had suddenly become scarce, and streets looking possibly barren in their absence, and always eerily quiet save for the soft padding of sandal-clad feet across tiled roofs. It was a sight that nobody in the team had personally seen before, and one that Naruto only knew of through occasions of older veterans and his parents' journals. A hidden village at war. For once, even Izuno and Kotetsu seemed busy, studiously examining the reports that came and left via Shinobi coming and going. They could only spare a brief word with Naruto as they reported their mission a success and quickly filed out the appropriate paperwork. A moment later, an escort arrived and promptly vanished with the prisoners in dizzyingly fast displays of efficiency. Sensei, what's going on? Ami managed to squeak out before heavy breaths, finally able to catch her second wind after a painfully fast sprint back to the village. What was worse was that Naruto didn't even look like he broke a sweat, and likely could have gone a lot faster. It was almost terrifying just how much more powerful he was than them. It didn't help that he had just unusually that he had been unusually quiet the entire way back after the Chunin had finally admitted that Takagakure, along with Kusugakure and Otagakure, had declared war on Konoha. I can't say yet, the redhead answered solemnly, his features set and discouragingly stern, but I'm going to find out. You guys should go home while you can. I imagine it's going to get very busy very soon. And with that, he blinked out in a flash of red. Thank you for your report, Kizuki. You're dismissed. He rose inside wearily, his strained eyes still managing to rise and meet those of his subordinates as the shinobi quickly saluted and vanished. He couldn't even keep track of how many similar reports he had heard or made today, but he had an obligation as Hokage to meet the eye of the men and women he might be very well sending to their deaths. Did you hear everything you need to, Naruto? He called out, seemingly to an empty room, although the old man knew better. So it's true. They really did declare war on us. The redhead spoke up, slipping through the window with a troubled expression as four Ambu simultaneously breathed a sigh of relief. What gave it away? The old man replied wearily with a humorous chuckle. It was not the time for comedy, but morale was almost as vital to a war effort as shinobi or kunai. Naruto remained stony faced, though, as he stepped in front of the desk. What happened? The older shinobi sighed, leaning back in his chair. Naruto knew the man was being serious as his pipe looked completely untouched. We still can't really be sure. I didn't get any word of this before Shinobi started returning home with reports of being attacked, especially along caravan routes. It was only a few hours ago that we confirmed exactly who it was attacking us. They had been using mostly hit and run tactics to try and catch us unaware, but like your team prove Konoha shinobi are not cattle walking to the slaughter, and many have escaped their ambushes. The Kage leaned forward, clasping their hands together. His various wrinkles and lines had never seemed so deep before. From what we can gather, it appears to be a joint assault on our borders from Kusa, Taki, and Oto. Already they have managed to move down as far as Kusuki Guy and have managed to entrance themselves deeply in the surrounding villages. He continued, getting Naruto to join him in frowning as the redhead sank into the chair opposite the older man. But why have they made demands? What reason could they have for attacking us out of the blue? The Jonin inquired more to himself than the Hokage. It's unprecedented. I'm afraid, but I almost feel as though I should have seen this coming. Kusa has always been somewhat of a wild card, and an attack from Otakagiri was always going to happen. However, I held out hope that Takagakure would not be swayed, but whatever false promise Orochimaru would have to offer them. At the mention of the snake sign, Naruto grimaced. You think he's behind it? Even as he asked, Naruto felt silly. Of course, the slippery Noonkin was behind all this. Hiruzen simply gave a wary sigh. Matters concerning his old students were always a sore and touchy subject. The delicate balance of powers between the five major villages has always put strain on the countries between us, and the resentment for their treatment as war buffers is always simmering just beneath the surface. Only Orochimaru would be mad enough to ignite that spark and fan it. Likely, with a smile on his face, the older shinobi conceded, causing Naruto to scowl. He could almost picture the sly grin on the pale-faced Missing features. However, a moment later, it was replaced by a smoldering grin in his violet eyes. Well then, ask whatever you need of my team and me. We'll work to the end. We'll work to end this war before any more lives are senselessly lost. The redhead announced. The redhead announced. The redhead announced resolutely, as the edge to his tone that made Hiruzen smile ever so briefly. You don't even understand how proud it makes me to hear that. Soon enough, though, the smile once again dissolved, replaced by a more professional look. However, in light of these recent developments, I'm afraid I am pushing up your team's promotions. As of now, all three are tuning. Naruto's eyes widened at that. He knew his team would likely be promoted, but in light of the war, he thought he would have at least some time to ease them into the new situation. However, before he could say anything, Hiruzen raised a hand. I'm afraid, Naruto, that you are too valuable a shinobi to be tied down to the type of missions fresh tuning will receive. It is a hard decision to separate a team just as war breaks out, but I have to use every resource available to me in the best way I can. Expecting protest, he was surprised then to find Naruto simply staring at him with a determined glint dancing behind his eyes. You aren't contesting me. The redhead seemed to consider it for a moment before shaking his head. Hiruzen hadn't seen such a resolute face since Minato left on the mission that would earn him the nickname the Yellow Flash. It was almost terrifying to see that reflected in his son, considering the potential lurking in that lithe frame. I understand. I understand. You're my Hokage. You can use me as you see fit. Naruto stood up then, the fire in his eyes never dimming for a moment as he turned to the exit. Now, if you excuse me, Hokage-sama, I have to remind the world how my father struck the fear of Konoha into an entire generation. His voice was practically a growl at this point, and only paused a moment at the door. His hair shrouded his eyes in shadow. They seemed to have forgotten in his absence. As Naruto stepped over the threshold of the house, he was nearly tackled right off his feet by a silvery blur. He managed to catch the little bundle of energy, though, swinging her around much to her excited cries. In that singular moment, with Haya held in his arms and the similar scent of dango hanging in the air, Naruto felt his earlier frustrations melt away. too many people home was similar where they too many people home was simply where they lived. But for Naruto, home meant the one place where the outside world would never touch him. It was just him and his family. Kami helped the people. Kami helped the person that tried to take his home from him. Naru-ni-san, Haya exclaimed brightly, her stormy eyes glistening with an unusual amount of excitement. People are running everywhere really fast, but Nichan won't let me run with them. Naruto simply blinked at the younger girl for a moment. I told you, Haya, they're not just running for fun. They have places to be anyway. None of them are just as fast. None of them are as fast as you, so you wouldn't have any fun. Uncle called out. She walked into the room wearing an apron, the scent of ramen wafting in behind her from the kitchen. Upon her explanation, Haya simply turned and stuck her tongue out, causing the Konoichi to roll her eyes playfully. Yeah, but now that Nissan is here, I can run with him, right? She asked Anko the question, but it was to Naruto that she turned and offered up her best puppy dog look, which the redhead maintained had to be illegally cute. Ah, sure. Naruto shamefully relented, unable to stand up to such an adorable look. It was only a kick in the gut when the little silver-haired bundle of energy beamed and wrinkled her way up his arms, quickly dashing off into the kitchen where apparently ramen awaited. The moment she was gone, Uncle seemed to literally teleport across the room, putting Naruto down into a searing kiss before he could even properly greet her. It only technically lasted a few seconds, but it still managed to leave Naruto somewhat breathless with its intensity. Well, hello to you too. He was fairly certain there was an all too goofy grin plastered on his features then. Oh, what's the occasion? He asked dreamily, eyes not quite focused as he tried to capture that feeling for a little longer. It turned out he didn't have to as Uncle leaned forward to plant another quick peck on his lips. Does there have to be? She shot back slightly, slinking back and putting on her best innocent expression. Well, I'd like to know if there is so I can make it happen again, Naruto admitted with that same goofy grin, only to sober as he saw Uncle's expression become just a little pensive. Well, I was just thinking about what's going on all of a sudden and how you're sure to be right there out there on the front lines. And however, the violet was cut off by a finger pressed against her lips as Naruto leaned in, so their faces were very close. Don't even talk like that. I mean, come on. He leaned back up and plastered what many knew to be a singular cocky grin across his features. It's me we're talking about. He chuckled as he struck a particularly goofy pose, almost like Jiraiya might during one of his lame introductions, and even Uncle had to suppress a few giggles. Anyways, what's all this worry that I'm getting? Am I not allowed to be worried about you going out and doing the same? It's not like you're a kunoichi. As he spoke, he slipped around the shorter woman, sliding his arms around her waist and nestling his chin on her shoulder. Oh, so now I need to be worried for because you're the big bad bloody Flash and I'm just Uncle Mitarashi? She questioned, only semi-serious, her eyebrows cocked expectantly. Almost instantly, Naruto froze before quickly releasing her and backing off, while whipping his hands in the air as he did so, as if to remove some invisible dust. Nuh-uh, I'm not touching that one again. To emphasize his point, he pivoted on one foot dramatically, crossing his arms and letting out a childish huff. This time it was Uncle who slunk up behind him to envelop his chest with her arms. Ah, not one itty-bitty argument about how powerful we are, Mr. Hokage candidate, she whispered in her best sultry tone, which just so happened to be incredibly good. Naruto simply shook his head again, letting out another melodramatic huff, although it seemed a bit strained and his legs nearly buckled. His uncle purposely rubbed her ample chest across his back. Nope, came his clear and direct response, and after a moment or two of silence, both grinned at the same moment, with Uncle releasing a playful sigh. Well, that's no fun. However, before Naruto could respond, Haya's chipper voice echoed in front of the kitchen. Oni-san, Oni-chan, the ramen's getting cold, she called, shattering the carefully constructed tension the couple had been building. Both let out a small chuckle at the same moment as the violet turned to reply. Well, we can't have that, she shouted boisterously, earning a faint giggle from the doorway. However, as she moved to actually enter the kitchen, she felt a strong grip around her waist, confusion evident on her face as she turned back to her redhead boyfriend. You know, with the war and everything, I would probably be gone quite a bit. It probably won't be easy, Naruto muttered, his brow creased at his usually vibrant eyes so quite dulled. However, Uncle's features merely softened as she took a step into him, letting him briefly envelop her with the proper hug. Or Shinobi, it isn't supposed to be easy, but that's why we make it work. Anyway, it's not like you have to go right now. You have time for ramen, right? She answered, earning a bright grin from the taller shinobi as both moved into the kitchen, still embracing like they never wanted to be separated. Of course, there's always time for ramen. End of chapter 31.